The boardroom on the 50th floor of Harrington Tower gleamed with understated luxury. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Manhattan's skyline like a golden kingdom. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Robert Harrington, his silver temples contrasting sharply with intense blue eyes that had stared down some of Wall Street's most formidable opponents. At 54, Robert commanded the room not with volume but with presence. His Tom Ford suit, tailored to his still athletic frame, whispered wealth rather than shouted it. The Rolex Platinum President on his wrist caught the light as he signed the final page of the acquisition agreement. $2 billion changing hands with the stroke of a Mont Blanc pen. "Gentlemen, I believe we have a deal." His voice carried the confidence of a man who had built an empire from the ground up. Harrington Technologies had started in a garage 30 years ago. Now it stood as one of the most valuable tech companies in America. The executives around the table erupted in congratulatory chatter. Robert nodded, his expression revealing nothing of the emptiness that had become his constant companion. Success had long ceased to fill the void. Catherine's death had left. 3 years without her, and the world still felt colorless. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Robert would typically ignore calls during meetings of this magnitude, but something, perhaps the same intuition that had guided his most profitable business decisions, compelled him to glance at the screen. Unknown number. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I need to take this." Robert stepped away from the table, walking toward the panoramic view of the city he owned significant portions of. "Mr. Harrington." His voice was clipped, professional. The female voice on the other end spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Mr. Harrington, I think you should know about the ring." Robert froze. His free hand instinctively moved to the silver band on his right hand, the one with the intricate ivy pattern that he never removed. The last gift Catherine had given him. "Who is this?" Blood pounded in his ears. "The ivy pattern is unique, Mr. Harrington. My mother had one exactly like it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "That's impossible," Robert said, his voice barely audible even to himself. "No one could know about this ring. Catherine took the matching one with her when she died." The line went silent for a moment. "My name is Melissa Bennett. I work at Riverside Diner in Westport, Connecticut. If you want to know more, you know where to find me." The call ended, leaving Robert staring at his reflection in the glass. Behind him, the celebration continued, oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed world had just begun to crack at its foundation. The private elevator ascended silently to the penthouse apartment, occupying the top 3 floors of the Sovereign on Upper East Side. At $25 million, it was among the most expensive residences in Manhattan, but to Robert, it had never felt like home. It was a showcase, a statement, a tax write-off, but never home. Robert loosened his tie as he stepped into the marble foyer. Museum-quality art adorned the walls, pieces worth millions that he barely noticed anymore. He poured himself 2 fingers of 30-year-old Macallan, the amber liquid catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of Central Park. He moved through the expansive living room toward the mantel, where a single photograph stood in a simple silver frame. Catherine smiled back at him, her green eyes sparkling with a secret amusement. The photograph captured her essence perfectly, beautiful, brilliant, and carrying a sadness behind her smile that few besides Robert ever noticed. 3 years today," he whispered, running his finger along the edge of the frame. "The anniversary of the yacht accident that took her from him. The Coast Guard had called it a tragic mishap, a sudden squall, a rogue wave. Catherine's body washed ashore 3 days later, the silver ivy ring still on her finger. Robert had insisted they bury her with it, or so everyone believed." Robert twisted the matching silver band on his own finger, a habit he'd developed when deep in thought or troubled. Catherine had given him the ring on their 20th anniversary, a match set with a curious ivy pattern that she'd insisted was symbolic of their intertwined lives. "There are some mistakes money can't fix, Catherine," he said to the empty room. "You were right." He drained the scotch, feeling the familiar burn. The mysterious call had unearthed something he'd spent years trying to bury. Someone knew about the rings. Someone connected to a diner in Connecticut, of all places. Robert walked to his office, the most secure room in the apartment. A retinal scan unlocked the hidden wall safe behind a Rothko painting. Inside, nestled among important documents and priceless family heirlooms, sat a small velvet box. He hadn't opened it in 3 years. Until now. Inside lay an elegant silver ring with the distinctive ivy pattern identical to the one on his finger. Catherine's ring, recovered from her body before burial against her explicit final wishes that she be buried with it, a secret he had kept from everyone, even from himself most days. Robert closed his fist around the ring, the metal warming against his palm. Tomorrow he would drive to Connecticut. Robert's Bentley Continental GT looked absurdly out of place in the gravel parking lot of Riverside Diner. The sleek black vehicle, with its handcrafted leather interior and six-figure price tag, stood in stark contrast to the weathered pickup trucks and sensible sedans that surrounded it. The diner itself was a study in Americana, a stainless steel boxcar structure with large windows and a neon sign that had seen better days. A hastily printed banner hung beneath the main sign, "Under new management, help save Riverside." Robert sat in his car watching patrons enter and exit. Working-class folks mostly, the kind of people who built the country but rarely benefited from the wealth they created, the kind of people Robert's father had been before Robert transformed their family legacy. He caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He'd deliberately dressed down in khakis and a blue button-up shirt, no tie. Still, he looked like what he was, a wealthy man slumming it. He removed his Rolex, placing it in the glove compartment, but kept the silver ring on his finger. The bell above the door jingled as Robert entered. The interior was clean, but dated vinyl booths. Formica tables, the perpetual scent of coffee and bacon grease. A faded "Support Our Troops" poster hung near a bulletin board crowded with community announcements. Half the booths were occupied despite it being mid-afternoon. "Seat yourself anywhere, hon. Someone will be with you in a minute." The voice belonged to an older waitress juggling 3 plates along her arm with practiced ease. Robert chose a booth in the corner with a clear view of the entire establishment. Old habits. Always position yourself to see all entrances and exits. His back to the wall. The lessons his first business mentor had taught him that had saved his life more than once in the early dangerous days of building his empire. He studied the laminated menu, though he had no appetite. The coffee mug before him was turned upside down, the standard diner signal that he was ready for service. "Can I get you something to drink?" Robert looked up and felt the air leave his lungs. Standing beside his table was a young woman in her early 30s, wheat blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, intelligent blue eyes that assessed him with a quick once-over. Her name tag read Melissa. Around her neck hung a thin silver chain disappearing beneath her uniform. "Coffee, please." Robert managed his voice steadier than he felt. She flipped his mug and filled it with practiced efficiency. "Know what you want to eat, or do you need a few minutes?" "Just coffee for now." Robert wrapped his hands around the mug, deliberately making his silver ring visible. Melissa's eyes flickered to it for just a moment, but her expression remained professionally neutral. "Let me know if you change your mind." As she walked away, Robert studied her. She moved with purpose, her posture suggesting someone who had carried heavy burdens. There was something in her bearing that reminded him of Catherine, a quiet resilience, an understated intelligence. Robert observed the diner while pretending to sip his coffee. Near the kitchen, an older man with military bearing was talking intently with a woman who appeared to be a supplier. Their expressions suggested the conversation wasn't going well. "That's Frank," said a voice beside him. Melissa had returned. "Owner of this place. Well, trying to stay the owner. Tough times." Oh, Robert found himself genuinely curious. "Big development company wants this land. They've been buying up everything along the river. Frank's the last holdout, but the bank's not being very understanding about the mortgage payments." She refilled his coffee, though he'd barely touched it. "Sorry, not your problem. Can I get you anything else?" Robert shifted, causing light to catch his silver ring. This time, Melissa's reaction was unmistakable. Her entire body tensed, eyes widening slightly as she focused on the ivy pattern etched into the metal. "That ring." Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "My mother had one exactly like it. She never took it off." The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Robert carefully set down his coffee mug. "Your mother was Rachel Bennett." Melissa's professional demeanor cracked, showing surprise beneath. "How did you know that?" "I think we have a lot to discuss, Ms. Bennett." Robert gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Perhaps when your shift ends." Her eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "My shift ends at 8, but I should warn you, Mr. Harrington, Robert Harrington." Recognition flickered in her eyes. Of course she would know the name. His face had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. I should warn you, Mr. Harrington, that if you're here about buying this diner, you're wasting your time. Frank won't sell no matter what your development company offers. Robert felt his eyebrows rise. My development company? Harrington Developments has been trying to buy this place for months. Their representative was just here yesterday, making threats barely disguised as offers. Her voice had taken on a protective edge. I see. Robert kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. Harrington Developments was indeed a subsidiary of his corporate empire, but he had delegated its operations years ago to Lawrence Crane. This particular acquisition had never crossed his desk. I'm not here about the diner, Ms. Bennett. I'm here about the ring your mother had, and possibly about Catherine. The color drained from Melissa's face. How do you know about Catherine? Before Robert could answer, the bell above the door jingled. A small girl, no more than 5 years old, burst into the diner, followed by an elderly woman who appeared to be struggling to keep up. Mommy! The child ran straight to Melissa, wrapping her arms around her mother's legs. Her blonde curls bounced as she looked up, her face brightening with a smile that transformed her serious little features. Emma, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Mrs. Peterson's until 6. Melissa's tone was gently scolding, but her hands smoothed the child's hair with obvious affection. Mrs. Peterson had a dentist appointment. She forgot. The elderly woman who'd followed Emma in approached slightly out of breath. I'm sorry, Melissa. She insisted on coming to see you rather than staying with me. It's fine, Mrs. Grayson. Thank you for bringing her. Melissa turned to Robert with an apologetic look. I need to figure this out. 8 o'clock if you're serious about talking. Robert nodded, watching as Melissa led her daughter to a back room, presumably an office or break room. The child Emma glanced back at him with startling intensity. For a moment, those blue eyes seemed to see right through him, assessing him in a way that felt almost familiar. He left a $20 bill under his coffee cup and walked out mind-churning. He hadn't expected to encounter a child. The complications multiplied exponentially. If his suspicions were correct, if Rachel Bennett was the same Rachel he had known all those years ago, then Melissa's age would align perfectly with. Robert pushed the thought away. He needed facts, not speculation. He needed to know exactly who Rachel Bennett had been, what connection she had to Catherine, and how she had come to possess a ring identical to the match set that had symbolized his marriage. He made a call from his car. Morgan, I have a job for you, too. Back in his suite at the Four Seasons Westport, Robert loosened his tie and poured himself another scotch. The view from his window overlooked the Saugatuck River, its surface rippling with evening light. Not so different from the bay where Catherine's yacht had gone down. He removed a worn leather journal from his briefcase, a relic he'd kept hidden for decades. Its pages contained memories he'd tried to forget the early years before wealth and success had insulated him from the rawness of life. Harvard, 1988. The crisp New England fall. Catherine Miller, the brilliant economics major with a laugh that could warm the coldest lecture hall. Rachel Wilson, intense and creative, an art student on scholarship with dreams bigger than her bank account. And himself, Robert Harrington, the scholarship kid with something to prove. The three of them had been inseparable that year. Studying together, sharing dreams, supporting each other through the brutality of elite academia. Robert had fallen in love with both women in different ways. Catherine represented the future he aspired to, brilliant, connected, sophisticated. Rachel embodied the passion and authenticity he feared losing in his climb to the top. The triangle had been precarious from the start. He turned to an entry from April 1990. Rachel had left Harvard, suddenly no explanation. Catherine had been inconsolable for weeks. They had nearly broken up over it, though neither would explain to him exactly what had happened. 5 years later, he and Catherine married. Robert was already making his first million with an innovative software platform. Catherine had brought connections and business acumen that accelerated his success exponentially. And then on their 5th anniversary, the rings. A match set with that distinctive ivy pattern that Catherine had designed herself. A symbol, she said, of how their lives had grown together unbreakable. She had never mentioned Rachel's name again. Until that last night on the yacht. Robert closed the journal, his mind troubled. He checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that had been his first major indulgence. 6 o'clock, 2 hours until he would meet Melissa again. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Lawrence Crane, his COO who ran Harrington Developments. Larry, Robert answered, keeping his voice casual. What's so important? It couldn't wait until I'm back in the city. Sorry to disturb you, Robert, but there's been some unusual activity with our Westport Riverfront development project. The bank suddenly called in their note on the Riverside Diner property. Our acquisition team didn't authorize that move. Robert's instincts sharpened. Interesting coincidence considering I'm in Westport right now. A pause on the line. I wasn't aware of that. Any particular reason? Just taking some personal time. The anniversary of Catherine's death has me reflective. Robert kept his voice neutral. Why would someone pressure the bank on this particular property? I don't know, sir, but I can look into it if you'd like. Do that, and Larry, no aggressive moves on that property until I've had a chance to review the entire development plan. Is that understood? Of course, sir. I'll have the complete file sent to you immediately. Robert ended the call, his suspicion growing. The timing was too perfect. First the mysterious call about the ring, then discovering his own company was pressuring the diner where Melissa worked. It couldn't be coincidence. The evening brought a gentle rain to Westport droplets gleaming in the glow of the diner's neon signs. Robert returned precisely at 8 this time, parking his Bentley farther from the entrance. The diner was nearly empty now, save for an elderly couple lingering over pie and coffee. Frank, the owner, was wiping down the counter. His weathered face and ramrod-straight posture spoke of military service. When he spotted Robert, his eyes narrowed with immediate recognition. We're closing up, Mr. Harrington. His tone made it clear he knew exactly who Robert was. I have an appointment with Melissa Bennett. Frank's expression remained guarded. She mentioned that. Said you weren't here about buying the place. I'm not. Good, because this diner's been in my family for 3 generations, and it'll take more than corporate bullying to make me give it up. Frank's voice carried the quiet dignity of a man who had faced worse enemies than predatory developers. Sometimes the things we run from the longest are the very things we need to face. Frank said, his gaze unwavering. Melissa's out back. She'll be in shortly. Robert found himself respecting the older man's directness. It was refreshing after decades of corporate doublespeak and political maneuvering. The bell above the door jingled as the elderly couple departed. Frank locked it behind them, flipping the sign to closed. The diner felt suddenly intimate, the rain creating a cocoon of white noise that isolated them from the world outside. Melissa emerged from the back, having changed from her uniform into jeans and a simple blue blouse. Her hair was down now, falling past her shoulders. The silver chain around her neck caught the light, and Robert could now see that it held what appeared to be a smaller version of the ivy-patterned ring. Mr. Harrington, she gestured toward her previous booth. Frank's going to watch Emma in the office while we talk. They sat across from each other, the vinyl squeaking beneath them. For a moment, neither spoke. Robert had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in his head during the afternoon, but now that the moment had arrived, he found himself uncharacteristically uncertain. Your mother, he finally began, Rachel Bennett. How did she die? Cancer 7 years ago. Melissa's fingers went to the ring on her necklace, a gesture that mirrored Robert's own habit. Ovarian. By the time they caught it, it was too late. I'm sorry, and Robert meant it. And your father, a flash of anger crossed Melissa's face. Never in the picture. Mom raised me alone. Worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Never complained. Her chin lifted slightly. Now it's your turn. How did you know my mother, and who is Catherine? Instead of answering directly, Robert reached into his pocket and removed a small photograph. It showed 3 young people, arms around each other's shoulders, laughing against the backdrop of a college campus in autumn. 2 young women and a young man. Harvard, 1988, he said, sliding the photo across the table. Your mother, Rachel Wilson at the time, Catherine Miller, and me. Melissa stared at the photograph, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced her mother's youthful face. Mom never told me she went to Harvard. She didn't graduate. She left after sophomore year. Robert paused. The 3 of us were inseparable for a time. Best friends. And the rings? Robert twisted his own. Catherine and I married in '95. On our 5th anniversary, she gave me this ring, a match set with an ivy pattern she designed herself. Except there were 3, not 2, Melissa finished for him, holding up her own smaller ring. Mom gave me this when I turned 16. said it was part of a set that someone very special had the others. The implications hung in the air between them. Robert could see Melissa processing, connecting dots, her intelligent eyes narrowing as pieces began to fall into place. How old are you, Melissa? 30. Her voice had gone very quiet. Born in 1990. The timing confirmed what Robert had begun to suspect from the moment he'd heard Rachel's name. And your birth certificate, does it list a father? No, Mom always said he wasn't important, that we were better off without him. Melissa's posture had become defensive. Why are you here, Mr. Harrington? After all these years, why now? Robert took a deep breath. Because 3 years ago, my wife Catherine died in what was ruled a boating accident, and I've recently begun to believe it might not have been an accident at all. Melissa's expression shifted from defensive to shocked. What does that have to do with my mother? I don't know yet, but Catherine and Rachel stayed in touch over the years, even after Rachel left Harvard. Catherine would sometimes disappear for a day or two, saying she was visiting an old friend. I never questioned it. Robert's voice grew heavier. The night before she died, Catherine was upset. She'd received a phone call that disturbed her deeply. She wouldn't tell me who it was from. The rain had intensified outside, drumming against the diner's large windows. The rhythmic sound filled the silence that had fallen between them. Mom used to get phone calls that would upset her too, Melissa said finally. She'd talk in whispers, and sometimes I'd hear her crying afterward. A small voice interrupted them. Mommy, Emma stood at the end of the table clutching a well-loved stuffed rabbit. Frank fell asleep in his chair. It's okay, sweetie. We're almost done here. Melissa's entire demeanor softened as she addressed her daughter. Emma turned her attention to Robert, studying him with that same unnerving intensity he'd noticed earlier. Her eyes went to his hand, focusing on the silver ring. You have the ivy ring too, she said, pointing, like the one in my pictures. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. What pictures, Emma? The little girl reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She carefully opened it and placed it on the table. It was a drawing remarkably detailed for a child her age of 3, interlocking rings with ivy patterns. I dream about them sometimes. The ivy talks to me. Emma said this matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. Grandpa says I'm special because I can see patterns other people miss. Emma has mild autism, Melissa explained quietly. She's extremely gifted with patterns and numbers. Robert stared at the drawing. It wasn't just 3 rings, it was an exact representation of how the 3 rings would lock together, forming a complex pattern that seemed almost like a key. Has she ever seen your mother's ring up close? He asked. No, Mom was already gone when Emma was born. Melissa gathered her daughter, close protective instinct visible in every line of her body. Mr. Harrington, you still haven't explained why you're really here or what you want from us. Before Robert could respond, headlights swept across the diner windows. A black SUV had pulled into the parking lot, its engine idling. Even through the rain-streaked glass, Robert could make out the figure behind the wheel, Lawrence Crane, the executive who ran Harrington Developments. Do you know that vehicle? Robert asked, suddenly alert. Melissa tensed. That's him. The man who keeps pressuring Frank to sell. He comes by every few days, usually with some new incentive or threat. Robert's mind raced. Crane had no reason to be here now, after business hours. Unless he had somehow tracked Robert's movements. Unless there was more at stake than a simple real estate acquisition. Melissa, I need you to trust me right now. Take Emma and go out the back. Go home, lock your doors, and don't answer for anyone. Robert's voice had taken on the commanding tone that had built his empire. I'll deal with Crane. Why should I trust you? I don't even know you. But Melissa was already gathering Emma's things, maternal instinct responding to the urgency in Robert's voice. Because I think we're both in danger. Because Catherine and your mother kept secrets that someone is willing to kill to protect. Robert met her eyes. And because I believe I'm Emma's grandfather. The words hung between them, the truth finally spoken aloud. Melissa's face went through a rapid succession of emotions. Shock, denial, anger, fear. But it was Emma who responded first. I knew it. The little girl clapped her hands. I told you the man with the ivy ring would come find us, Mommy. Outside, the SUV door opened. Crane stepped out into the rain. Go now. Robert moved toward the front of the diner as Melissa hurried Emma toward the back exit. Frank had appeared from the back office, alerted by the commotion. "What's happening?" "Crane's here. Get them out safely," Robert instructed. "I'll handle this." Frank nodded, once military training evident in his immediate understanding of the situation. He followed Melissa and Emma toward the rear of the building. Robert straightened his shoulders and moved to the door. Lawrence Crane was halfway across the parking lot now, rain plastering his expensive suit to his tall, lean frame. His face, visible in flashes of neon light, wore an expression of calculated determination. As Robert unlocked the diner door, he felt the weight of the silver ring on his finger. Whatever game was being played, it had begun long ago with 3 young people and 3 silver rings. And now, 3 decades later, the consequences were finally coming home to roost. Robert stepped outside, letting the door close behind him. Rain immediately soaked through his shirt, but he barely noticed. He blocked Crane's path, using his body to shield the view into the diner. "Larry, what a surprise!" Robert kept his voice casual, but his stance was unmistakably protective. Crane halted, shock registering on his angular features. At 60, he was tall and fit, with silver hair that belied his ruthless business acumen. For 15 years, he had been Robert's right-hand man, the executor of difficult decisions that kept Harrington Technologies at the cutting edge of the industry. "Robert, what are you doing here?" Genuine surprise or well-feigned? Robert couldn't tell. "I could ask you the same question, especially since I explicitly told you to back off this property this afternoon." Crane's expression shifted, recalibrating. "I came to assess the situation personally. This property is crucial for the riverfront development." "At 9 o'clock at night in the rain?" Robert let skepticism color his tone. "Real estate never sleeps." Crane attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The board is pressing for progress on this project. You've been distracted lately." The implied criticism hung between them like a challenge. 3 years ago, Robert might have fired Crane on the spot for such insubordination. But grief had indeed dulled his appetite for corporate warfare, allowing ambitious lieutenants like Crane to quietly expand their influence. "The board reports to me, Larry, not the other way around." Robert stepped closer, using his slightly broader frame to full advantage. "Now, why are you really here?" Something flickered in Crane's eyes, calculation perhaps, or fear. His gaze dropped momentarily to Robert's hand, to the silver ring gleaming in the rain. "Interesting piece of jewelry," Crane said softly. "Custom made, I presume." The hairs on the back of Robert's neck stood up. How would Crane know or care about his ring unless— "Go home, Larry, and stay away from this diner and everyone connected to it. Consider that a direct order." Crane held his gaze for a long moment, then inclined his head in a gesture that might have been deference but felt like mockery. "As you wish." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Robert, the board meeting tomorrow morning, they're expecting a full update on your whereabouts and activities, just so you know." The threat was thinly veiled. Robert watched as Crane returned to his SUV and drove away, taillights disappearing into the rainy night. Only when the vehicle was completely out of sight did he turn back to the diner. Inside, he found Frank standing guard at the back door, baseball bat in hand. "Melissa and the kid?" Robert asked. "Gone. I sent them out the service road behind the diner. My nephew's picking them up half a mile down." Frank's expression was grim. "Want to tell me what's going on?" Melissa looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Maybe she has." Robert ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair. "Frank, I need to ask you something. How long has Lawrence Crane been pressuring you to sell?" "Started about 6 months ago, right after the previous owner died suddenly. Heart attack, they said." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Though now I'm wondering if it was really that simple." "Who was the previous owner?" "Guy named Wilson, Michael Wilson, owned this place for nearly 30 years. Inherited it from his brother who died back in the 90s. Robert felt the floor shift beneath him. Wilson, Rachel's maiden name. Did Michael Wilson have any connection to Rachel Bennett? Frank's weathered face registered surprise. She was his niece. How did you know that? The pieces were beginning to align, forming a pattern as intricate as the ivy on the silver rings. Rachel's uncle had owned this diner. After her death, her daughter had come to work here, under the protection of Frank, the new owner. Frank, I think you and this diner are part of something much bigger than a real estate deal. Robert pulled out his phone. And I think we're all in danger. I need to find Melissa and Emma before Crane does. You think Crane is after them? Frank's hand tightened on the baseball bat. I think Crane is after something that Rachel, Catherine, and I created 30 years ago. Something valuable enough to kill for. Robert dialed a number, and I think the 3 rings are the key. As he waited for the call to connect, Robert looked down at the silver band on his finger. The ivy pattern seemed to shift in the fluorescent light, revealing complexities he'd never noticed before, just like Emma's drawing had shown. James Morgan, answered the gruff voice on the other end. Morgan, it's Harrington. I need your help immediately. I'm in Westport, Connecticut. What's the situation? The former FBI agent's voice shifted to alert professionalism. Possible threat to a woman and child. Corporate espionage may be worse. I need protection and investigation. Names, Melissa Bennett and her daughter Emma. Also, I need everything you can find on Lawrence Crane's activities over the past 3 years. Focus on any connection to my wife Catherine's boating accident. A pause on the line. You think your wife's death wasn't an accident? I think nothing about this situation is what it seems. Robert's voice hardened with resolve. I need you here tonight, Morgan. And I need you to bring whatever resources necessary to keep 2 people safe while we unravel what's really happening. I'm on my way, 2 hours tops. Robert ended the call and turned to Frank. I need somewhere safe to take Melissa and Emma while my security consultant gets here. Somewhere Crane wouldn't know about. Frank considered for a moment, then nodded. My cabin, upstate New York, off the grid. No one at Harrington Developments knows about it. Good. Call your nephew. Tell him to bring them back here. We'll leave immediately. As Frank made the call, Robert stared out at the rain-lashed parking lot. The night had taken on a dreamlike quality, past and present, merging like the ivy patterns on the 3 silver rings. 3 decades of secrets were unraveling, revealing a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But Emma's words echoed in his mind. Grandpa says I'm special because I can see patterns other people miss. Grandpa, the word stirred something primal in him, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. If Emma truly was his granddaughter, if Melissa was his daughter, then he had failed them both for 30 years. He wouldn't fail them again. Whatever secrets the rings held, whatever danger Crane represented, Robert would face it head on. For Catherine's memory, for Rachel's sacrifice, for the family he never knew he had. The rain continued to fall, washing away the boundaries between Robert Harrington's carefully controlled world and the messy, dangerous truth that had been waiting to emerge for 3 decades. A truth encoded in 3 silver rings with a pattern of ivy that spoke to a special little girl in her dreams. Robert Harrington sat in his suite at the Catskill Mountain Lodge, the rich leather of the armchair creaking beneath him as he studied the laptop screen. Outside, dawn painted the mountains in hues of amber and gold, a stark contrast to the darkness of the information displayed before him. Frank's cabin had proven an ideal temporary sanctuary. Nestled deep in the woods of upstate New York, the rustic 2-bedroom structure sat at the end of a dirt road that wasn't on any map. The property had been in Frank's family for 3 generations, a retreat from the world that now served as their safe haven. Melissa and Emma slept in the larger bedroom, exhaustion having finally overtaken their fear. Robert had spent the night combing through files that James Morgan had sent securely to his encrypted laptop. The former FBI agent's report was thorough and disturbing. Rachel Bennett, born Rachel Wilson, 1970, died 2018. Robert murmured, scanning the document. Cause of death, ovarian cancer. Yet something about the medical examiner's report troubled Morgan. The cancer diagnosis was real, but the rapidity of Rachel's decline suggested other factors might have been involved. Toxicology reports had been inconclusive, a red flag to someone with Morgan's experience. Robert's finger traced the screen, following the timeline of Rachel's life after she'd left Harvard. She'd bounced between jobs, mostly in art galleries and design studios. Always talented, never quite successful. Single mother to Melissa, born 1995. Father not listed on the birth certificate. The timing fits. Robert whispered, the weight of this truth settling deeper into his consciousness. If Melissa was indeed his daughter, conceived during that brief turbulent time when he and Catherine had separated, it would explain so much. Catherine's periodic disappearances to visit an old friend. The matched set of rings that had always seemed incomplete somehow. Robert clicked to another document, this one focusing on Lawrence Crane. His trusted lieutenant for 15 years had a hidden side that Robert had never suspected. Large cash deposits to offshore accounts, meetings with Chinese technology executives that never appeared on his official calendar. And most damning of all, Crane had been on a business trip to the same coastal area on the weekend of Catherine's fatal boating accident. The phone beside him vibrated. Morgan. Tell me, Robert answered without preamble. I've located Catherine's original autopsy report. Morgan's voice was grim, the one that wasn't released to the press. There were traces of a sedative in her system. Not enough to kill her, but enough to impair judgment and motor skills. Robert's hand tightened on the phone. You're saying she was drugged. I'm saying it's highly suspicious that a woman known for her sailing expertise would make a fatal error in calm waters with a mild sedative in her system. And Crane's connection. Still piecing that together, but here's something interesting. 2 weeks before Catherine died, she filed a patent application. It was withdrawn immediately after her death. Robert frowned. What kind of patent? Encryption technology. Something called the Ivy Protocol. Ring any bells? The Ivy pattern on the silver rings flashed in Robert's mind. Send me everything you have on it, and Morgan, find out if Rachel Bennett ever worked with encryption or security technology. Already on it. One more thing. Crane has mobilized Harrington Technologies' corporate security team. Officially, they're searching for you due to concerning behavior following the anniversary of your wife's death. He's making a play for control of the company, Robert said, unsurprised, using my absence as leverage with the board. It's more than that. He's hunting for something specific. The security team has orders to secure any personal items, especially jewelry. The rings. Crane was after the rings. Where are you now? Robert asked. 2 hours out from your location. I'm bringing additional security personnel I trust personally. Good, we may need to move quickly. Robert ended the call and stood stretching his stiff muscles. He moved to the cabin's small kitchen, where the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. Frank was already up, methodically cleaning a hunting rifle at the wooden table. Expecting trouble, Robert asked, pouring himself a cup. Always do. Frank's weathered hands worked with practiced efficiency. Military taught me that. Which branch? Marines, 20 years, retired as Master Sergeant. Frank glanced up. You serve? Robert shook his head. Too busy building my first company. Different kind of battlefield. Frank set the rifle aside. So you're going to tell me what this is really about? Why Crane wants my diner so badly he'd threaten a woman and her child? Robert considered his words carefully. I think it's about what's buried beneath your diner. Frank's eyebrows rose. There's nothing under there except an old storage cellar. Are you sure about that? Robert sipped his coffee. When was the last time you went down there? Years ago. Michael Wilson, the previous owner, kept it locked. Said it was structurally unsound. Frank's eyes narrowed. You think there's something hidden down there? I think Rachel and Catherine hid something valuable there years ago, something worth killing for. A floorboard creaked behind them. Melissa stood in the doorway, Emma clinging to her hand. The little girl's eyes were wide, still heavy with sleep, but her gaze locked immediately on Robert. You found out about the music box, Emma said solemnly. Robert and Frank exchanged glances. What music box, sweetheart? Melissa asked, smoothing her daughter's tangled curls. The one under the floor where the ivy grows. Emma yawned. Grandma Catherine showed me in my dreams. The morning sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Emma sat at the kitchen table, happily munching on pancakes Frank had prepared, seemingly oblivious to the tension surrounding the adults. Melissa stood by the window, arms crossed defensively over her chest, watching Robert with wary eyes. The revelation that he might be her father hung unacknowledged between them. You expect me to believe my 5-year-old daughter is having psychic dreams about your dead wife? Her voice was low, mindful of Emma's presence. I don't know what to believe anymore, Robert admitted, but I know Catherine and your mother were involved in something important, something worth protecting, and worth killing for. Melissa's blue eyes, so like his own, flashed with anger. If what you're suggesting is true, then my mother died because of whatever this is, and now my daughter is involved. I'm trying to understand this too, Robert said, but we can't ignore the connections. The rings of Emma's drawings, her knowledge of things she couldn't possibly know. Melissa pulled out her phone and opened a web browser. I did some research on you last night, Mr. Harrington. Did you know there are entire Reddit threads dedicated to your company's questionable business practices? Employees work to exhaustion, competitors crushed through legal loopholes, environmental regulations sidestepped. Robert maintained his composure, though the accusations stung. The technology business is competitive. I've made decisions I'm not proud of. And now, suddenly you care about protecting us? Melissa's voice dripped with skepticism. How convenient that you discover you have a long-lost daughter but just when you need access to whatever my mother and your wife hid. That's not fair, Robert started, but Melissa cut him off. Fair, my mother worked 3 jobs to put food on our table. She went without medication sometimes so I could have school supplies. Where were you then? Her voice cracked slightly. If you're really my father, you've had 30 years to find us. The accusation landed like a physical blow. I didn't know, Robert said quietly. Catherine never told me Rachel was pregnant. Convenient excuses from a billionaire. Melissa pulled up another page on her phone. Here's another interesting fact. Harrington Developments bought the land surrounding Riverside Diner 6 months ago, right after my mother died. The same month Lawrence Crane visited her in the hospital. Robert froze. Crane visited your mother? Yes, I thought he was just some insurance representative. He brought flowers, spoke with her privately. Melissa's expression darkened. The next day she took a turn for the worse. The doctors couldn't explain it. The implications were chilling. If Crane had indeed accelerated Rachel's death, if he had somehow been involved in Catherine's accident, then they were dealing with something far more sinister than corporate espionage. Melissa, I understand your distrust. But right now, Crane is hunting for something connected to those rings, something your mother and Catherine created. And he's willing to eliminate anyone who gets in his way. Robert met her gaze steadily. I need you to trust me just long enough to figure out what this is about. Trust is earned, Mr. Harrington. Melissa glanced at Emma, who was now drawing contentedly at the table. But for her sake, I'll cooperate. For now. Emma looked up suddenly, her blue eyes intense. The music box has the butterflies inside, she announced, but you need all 3 keys to open it. Robert and Melissa exchanged glances. What butterflies, sweetheart? Melissa asked. The ones that fly across the ocean, Emma said, as if it were obvious. The ones that change everything. James Morgan arrived at the cabin shortly before noon, accompanied by 2 former military personnel who took up positions outside the property. The veteran investigator looked exhausted but alert, his silver hair rumpled from the long drive. We need to move, he said without preamble, setting a thick folder on the kitchen table. Crane has dispatched teams to Connecticut and is leveraging his connections at the state police to expand the search. What's he telling people? Robert asked. That you've had a mental break following the anniversary of your wife's death, that you've kidnapped a woman and child. Morgan's expression was grim. He's painting you as unstable, dangerous, setting the stage to take control of Harrington Technologies. Robert nodded unsurprised. Classic corporate takeover strategy. Discredit the founder, install new leadership, claim it's for the good of the company. It's more than that. Morgan opened the folder, revealing photographs of what appeared to be a yacht. I've been digging into Catherine's accident. The official report states she was alone on the boat when the storm hit, but I found these. The photographs showed Catherine on her yacht, but she wasn't alone. A tall man in sunglasses stood beside her, his face partially obscured. Crane, Robert said, recognizing the distinctive posture. Yes, these were taken the day she died. He was on the boat with her, Robert, and he was conspicuously absent from the follow-up investigation. Melissa leaned in, studying the photos. Is that my mother's ring? She asked, pointing to Catherine's hand. Robert looked closer. Catherine was indeed wearing her ivy ring, but there appeared to be something else, a small pendant or object attached to it. Can you enhance this? He asked. Morgan nodded to one of his associates, who set up a laptop and began working on the image. As the resolution improved, they could see that Catherine's ring had a small USB drive attached to it by a delicate silver chain. The key, Emma said from behind them, startling the adults. She had approached silently and now pointed at the screen. One of the 3 keys. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. The encryption key, he murmured. Catherine was wearing one of the encryption keys when she died. Morgan handed Robert another document, the patent application for the Ivy protocol. It describes a revolutionary encryption method using three physical keys, each containing part of the algorithm. All three are needed to access the protected data. And Catherine had one on her ring, Melissa said slowly. My mother must have had the second on hers. And the third, Frank asked, speaking for the first time since Morgan arrived. All eyes turned to Robert's silver ring. I don't have a USB drive attached to mine, he said, extending his hand to show them. Emma shook her head. Not on it, in it. Before Robert could respond, Morgan's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. Surveillance footage from the diner's security camera, he said, turning the phone so they could see. From last night after we left. The grainy video showed three men in dark clothing entering Riverside Diner through a back window. They moved methodically through the space, eventually focusing on the floor behind the counter. With pry bars, they began removing floorboards. They're looking for the music box, Emma said matter-of-factly. Frank stood abruptly. I'm going back. That diner's been in my family for generations. It's too dangerous, Morgan warned. Crane's men will be watching it. Then we need to get there first, Robert said, his mind racing. If there's something hidden beneath those floorboards, we need to retrieve it before Crane does. And how do you propose we do that? Melissa asked. Walk in the front door while Crane's thugs are tearing up the place. Robert smiled grimly. No, we go in through the cellar. The entrance that's not on any blueprint. Frank looked at him in surprise. How do you know about that? I don't, but Emma does. Robert turned to the little girl. Don't you, Emma? Emma nodded solemnly. The secret door is behind the big maple tree. Grandma Catherine showed me. As Morgan and his team prepared for the return to Westport, Robert sat with Emma at a kitchen table. The little girl was drawing again, her small hands moving with surprising precision as she created an intricate diagram. Can you tell me about the music box, Emma? Robert asked gently. Emma didn't look up from her drawing. It's not really a music box, that's just what they called it. You mean Grandma Catherine and your grandmother Rachel? Emma nodded. And the sad man with the glasses. Robert exchanged glances with Melissa, who sat nearby, listening intently. Do you know his name, sweetheart? Melissa asked. Dr. Chen, Emma continued drawing. He helped make the butterflies. Robert felt his pulse quicken. Dr. Chen. The name was familiar from the early days of Harrington Technologies. Dr. Wei Chen had been a brilliant encryption specialist who had worked briefly for the company before returning to China under mysterious circumstances. He'd reportedly died in a car accident shortly after. Emma, these butterflies, are they real butterflies? Robert asked. Emma looked up, her blue eyes serious. They're code butterflies. They fly through walls and locks. Nothing can stop them. A quantum encryption breakthrough. Robert suddenly understood what Catherine and Rachel had been protecting. Years ahead of its time, a truly unhackable encryption method would be worth billions, potentially disruptive to national security infrastructure worldwide. The Ivy Protocol, Robert murmured. They created it together, Catherine with her mathematical genius, Rachel with her artistic pattern recognition, and Dr. Chen with his quantum computing expertise. But why hide it? Melissa asked. Why not patent it properly? Because some technologies are too dangerous for any single entity to control, Morgan answered, joining them, especially governments. Robert nodded slowly. Catherine always believed certain technologies should belong to everyone or no one. She must have discovered that Crane was planning to sell the protocol exclusively to the highest bidder. And my mother, Melissa's voice was tight with emotion. Where does she fit in this? Rachel was the artist, Robert said, memories flooding back. She had an extraordinary ability to recognize and create patterns, essential for advanced encryption. Emma held up her drawing. It showed three rings arranged in a specific configuration, forming what appeared to be a key shape. Around the edges were mathematical formulas that no 5-year-old should know. The butterflies are sleeping until all three keys wake them up, she said. Then they fly free for everyone. Robert understood now. Catherine and Rachel hadn't been hiding the encryption protocol to keep it secret. They were protecting it until it could be released to the public domain beyond the control of corporations or governments. And Crane had killed them to prevent exactly that. Morgan received another alert on his phone, this one causing him to curse under his breath. New development, he said, showing Robert a security camera image. This man has been asking questions about Melissa in town, claimed to be a relative. The photo showed a rugged man in his late 30s with close-cropped hair and cold eyes. He carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone with military or law enforcement training. Melissa gasped, "Daniel Harlow." Robert turned to her. "You know him?" "He dated my mother briefly when I was in high school. Bad news. Ex-military with anger issues. Mom broke it off, but he kept showing up for months afterward." Melissa's face had gone pale. "He was obsessed with her." "Crane must have recruited him," Morgan said. "His type is easy to find if you know where to look. Still desperate, willing to do anything for the right price." "He's dangerous," Melissa said, her arms instinctively going around Emma. "He used to talk about his special ops days, the things he'd done. Mom was terrified of him." Robert felt a protective rage building inside him. "Morgan, can your team handle him?" "We can try, but it complicates things. Harlow is likely just a hired gun, but he has skills that make him unpredictable." Emma tugged at Melissa's sleeve. "The angry man is looking for the butterfly box too, but he doesn't know about the secret door." Robert made a decision. "We move now, tonight, before Crane brings in more resources." He turned to Melissa. "I understand if you want to stay here with Emma where it's safer." Melissa straightened, a determination in her eyes that reminded Robert painfully of Rachel. "My mother died protecting this thing. I need to see it through." "And Emma?" "I need to go too," Emma said with surprising firmness. "I know where the door is. I know how the keys work." Frank cleared his throat. "I'll keep the little ones safe. Military training comes in handy sometimes." Robert nodded gratefully. "Morgan, how soon can we be ready?" 30 minutes. But Robert, you should know something else." The former FBI agent looked troubled. "The board of Harrington Technologies has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. The agenda includes a vote on your removal as CEO." "Let them try," Robert said grimly. "By tomorrow, we'll either have the evidence we need to expose Crane, or none of this will matter anyway." Darkness had fallen by the time they approached Riverside Diner. Morgan's team had scouted the area, confirming that Crane's men were still inside, methodically tearing up floorboards in search of the hidden encryption key. The group moved silently through the woods behind the diner, guided by Emma's surprisingly confident directions. The little girl walked hand in hand with Frank, occasionally stopping to orient herself as if following an invisible map. "There," she whispered, pointing to a massive maple tree that stood perhaps 30 feet from the diner's back wall. "The door is underneath." Frank examined the area around the tree's base, finding nothing but dirt and roots. "You sure about this, kiddo?" Emma nodded emphatically and knelt down, brushing away fallen leaves to reveal what appeared to be an ordinary tree root. But when she pressed a particular spot, a subtle click sounded, and a section of ground beside the tree shifted slightly. "Hidden entrance to the storm cellar," Frank murmured appreciatively. "Clever." With Morgan's help, they carefully lifted the camouflage trapdoor, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was cool and damp, smelling of earth and age. "I'll go first," Morgan said, drawing his weapon and switching on a small tactical flashlight. The narrow tunnel extended perhaps 20 yards, gradually sloping downward before opening into a larger space beneath the diner. Ancient brick walls supported the structure above, with thick wooden beams spanning the ceiling. The flashlight beam revealed crates of supplies, old restaurant equipment, and decades of accumulated storage. "Over there," Emma whispered, pointing to the far corner, under the wooden floor. Robert followed her gaze, noticing a section of flooring that appeared newer than the rest. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of Crane's men continuing their search. "They're getting closer to this section," Morgan warned. "We need to move quickly." Frank and Morgan carefully moved aside some crates, revealing the newer floorboards. A faint pattern had been burned into the wood, an ivy design matching the rings. "This is it," Robert said. He turned to Emma. "Now what?" "All 3 rings together," Emma said. "They make the key." Robert removed his silver band, studying it closely for the first time in years. The ivy pattern was intricate, with subtle variations he'd never noticed before. Melissa handed him her mother's ring from its chain around her neck, and Robert placed Catherine's ring from his pocket alongside them. 3 rings, 3 sizes, 3 variations of the same pattern, just as Emma had drawn. "They fit together somehow," Robert murmured. Emma reached for the rings, arranging them in the specific configuration from her drawing. When properly aligned, the ivy patterns formed a continuous design across all 3 bands. Now press them here, she said, indicating the center of the burned ivy pattern on the floorboard. Robert placed the connected rings against the wood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click sounded, and a small section of flooring recessed and slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a burnished metal box, approximately the size of a hardcover book, intricately engraved with the same ivy pattern as the rings. No keyhole was visible, no obvious way to open it. "The music box," Emma whispered. Before Robert could reach for it, a loud crash sounded from above, followed by shouting. "They've found the entrance," Morgan hissed, weapon raised toward the tunnel. "We need to go. Now." Robert quickly grabbed the metal box, surprised by its weight. He tucked it securely inside his jacket as Morgan and his team took up defensive positions. "There's another way out," Emma said urgently. "Through the old well." Frank looked skeptical. "What old well?" "This building was a trading post in the 18, Emma explains with a certainty that seemed impossible for her age. "They built over the well, but it leads to the river." Robert didn't question how Emma knew this. Following her lead had brought them this far. "Show us," he said. Emma led them to what appeared to be a brick wall pressing against a particular brick that was slightly discolored. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. "Go," Morgan ordered, as footsteps pounded down the tunnel behind them. "I'll hold them off." "James," Robert began. "I've got this. Get that box somewhere safe." Morgan's expression was resolute. "My team will extract me." Robert nodded grimly, guiding Melissa and Emma into the passage with Frank close behind. The narrow tunnel forced them to proceed single file, illuminated only by Frank's flashlight. Behind them, gunfire erupted, the sound muffled by the thick walls. "Keep moving," Robert urged when Melissa hesitated. The passage curved gradually downward, the brick walls giving way to rough-hewn stone. The air grew damper, the sound of running water becoming audible ahead. "The river tunnel," Emma said confidently. The passage eventually opened onto a small chamber containing an ancient well shaft. Beside it, a newer metal ladder descended into darkness. The sound of flowing water echoed from below. "Underground river access," Frank said, understanding dawning. "Prohibition-era smuggling route, most likely." "Down here," Emma said, pointing to the ladder. Robert went first, the metal box secure against his chest. The ladder extended perhaps 30 feet down, ending at a small stone platform beside flowing black water. The underground river moved swiftly but silently, disappearing into a tunnel large enough for a small boat. One by one, the others joined him on the platform. Frank came last, pulling the access door closed behind him. "Think Morgan made it out?" Melissa asked, her voice tight with worry. "He's resourceful," Robert replied, hoping his confidence was justified. "His team knows what they're doing." A distant shout echoed down the shaft, followed by the beam of a flashlight sweeping the chamber above. "They're coming," Frank warned. "There," Emma pointed to a small wooden boat tethered to the platform, another relic from an era of rum runners and secret passage. "Will it hold us?" Melissa asked doubtfully. "It doesn't need to go far," Robert said, helping Emma into the craft. "Just far enough to reach the river exit." Frank untied the rope, and the current immediately caught the boat, pulling it into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed them completely, broken only by the beam of Frank's flashlight. The ceiling lowered as they progressed, forcing them to duck their heads. "How far does this go?" Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About 200 yards, Emma replied, with that same impossible certainty. "It comes out by the old boathouse." The underground journey seemed to stretch endlessly, the boat occasionally scraping against the stone walls as the current carried them forward. Behind them, shouts and splashes suggested their pursuers had reached the platform and were attempting to follow. Finally, the tunnel began to lighten ahead, moonlight reflecting off the water. The boat emerged into the open river, the dilapidated remains of a boathouse visible on the nearby shore. "Head for the trees," Robert directed as Frank guided the boat toward land. They had barely reached the shore when flashlight beams appeared at the tunnel exit behind them. A shout went up, followed by the crack of a gunshot. The bullet splintered wood near Melissa's head. "Run!" Frank ordered, pulling a small handgun from his ankle holster. "I'll cover you." Robert grabbed Emma, lifting the child into his arms as they sprinted for the tree line. Melissa close behind. The metal box pressed painfully against his ribs, a tangible reminder of what they were fighting for. More gunshots rang out, followed by the measured return fire from Frank's weapon. They reached the protective darkness of the trees just as a black SUV roared into the boathouse, clearing headlights sweeping the area. "This way!" Robert gasped, leading them deeper into the woods. Behind them, the gunfire intensified, then abruptly ceased. Whether Frank had escaped or been captured, there was no way to know. They pushed on through the forest, guided by starlight and desperation, the weight of 3 decades of secrets contained in the metal box that might hold the key to everything or become their death warrant. Bump. Dawn broke over the dense New England forest, pale light filtering through autumn leaves. Robert, Melissa, and Emma had found temporary refuge in a small hunting blind after their harrowing escape through the underground river tunnel. They had traveled through the night, evading the search teams that combed the woods with flashlights and dogs. The metal box, the so-called music box, rested heavily in Robert's backpack, its secrets still locked within. Emma slept fitfully against her mother's shoulder, exhaustion finally overwhelming the child's remarkable endurance. Melissa stroked her daughter's hair absently, her gaze fixed on the silver ring that now hung alongside her mother's on the chain around her neck. Robert had insisted she take Catherine's ring for safekeeping. "3 keys," she murmured, touching the rings. "One for each of us." Robert nodded, wincing as he dabbed at the dried blood on his temple, where a branch had struck him during their escape. His once expensive clothes were torn and mud-stained, a stark contrast to the corporate titan who had signed a $2 billion deal just days ago. "Catherine designed it that way deliberately," Hisagenti said. "The encryption protocol could only be accessed if all 3 key holders agreed. A safeguard against exactly what Crane is trying to do." "How did you and Frank get separated at the river?" Melissa asked the question that had been bothering her since they'd continued their escape alone. Robert's expression darkened. "When the shooting started, Frank told me to get you and Emma to safety. He drew their fire, led them in the opposite direction. I saw him dive into the water near the boathouse. I think he planned to circle back and lose them in the woods." "Do you think he made it?" "Frank's a survivor. 20 years as a Marine. He knows how to handle himself." Robert hoped his confidence wasn't misplaced. Melissa studied him, this man who claimed to be her father, who had upended her life in less than 48 hours. Part of her still resisted the idea, but the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore: the timing of her birth, her mother's secrecy about her father, the rings, even her own reflection with those unmistakable Harrington blue eyes. "If what you're saying is true, if this encryption technology is so revolutionary, why didn't my mother or Catherine ever mention it to me?" she asked. "To protect you," Robert said simply. "The fewer people who knew about it, the safer everyone would be." "Fat lot of good that did them," Melissa said bitterly. "They're both dead." Robert flinched at her words but didn't argue. "You're right. Their secrecy didn't save them. But it might have been meant to save you and Emma." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Catherine died 3 years ago. If Crane was behind it, why didn't he go after Rachel immediately? Why wait years before accelerating her cancer?" Melissa considered this. "Because they didn't have all the pieces yet." "Exactly. Something changed. Something made finding the protocol suddenly urgent." Robert's voice dropped. "I think it was Emma." Melissa instinctively tightened her arms around her sleeping daughter. "Emma, what does she have to do with this? Her abilities, the way she knows things she couldn't possibly know." Robert hesitated. "Melissa, when did Emma first start talking about Catherine in her dreams?" Melissa's breath caught. "About 7 months ago, just before Mom died." "And Rachel knew about it?" "Yes, Mom was disturbed by it at first. Then she seemed to accept it, even encourage it." Melissa's brow furrowed. "She started taking Emma to the diner more often after that. I thought it was just to give me a break, but—" "She was preparing Emma," Robert said softly. "Teaching her about the secret entrance, the patterns, everything she would need to know." "But how could Emma know things about Catherine, about the music box? She never met either of them." Robert shook his head. "I don't know yet, but Catherine was deeply interested in quantum physics. She had theories about consciousness and quantum entanglement that most physicists dismissed as fringe science. What if she was right? What if there's a connection through the quantum material in these rings that somehow Emma is sensitive to?" As if hearing her name, Emma stirred and opened her eyes. Those remarkable blue eyes, so like Robert's own, focused with uncanny clarity for a child just waking. "The angry men are coming," she announced calmly. "We need to open the box now." Robert and Melissa exchanged alarmed glances. "How do you know that, sweetie?" Melissa asked. "I can hear their radios." Emma sat up, fully awake now. They're using the dogs to track us. The first team is about 20 minutes away. Robert moved to the blind small window, peering out at the forest. Nothing visible yet, but Emma's warnings had proven accurate too many times to dismiss. He wondered briefly how Morgan would find them if Crane's men were having such difficulty, but pushed the thought aside for now. They needed to focus on the immediate problem. "We need to move," he said, gathering their meager supplies. "But first, Emma's right. We need to open the box." Melissa pulled the chain from her neck, removing the 2 rings. Robert added his own, and together they examined the burnished metal container with its intricate ivy pattern. "There's no keyhole," Melissa observed, running her fingers along the seams. "Not a conventional one." Robert turned to Emma. "How do the rings open it, sweetheart?" Emma took the 3 rings, arranging them in the specific configuration she'd drawn earlier. The ivy patterns aligned, forming a continuous design. "Like this," she said, placing the connected rings against a circular depression in the box's lid that Melissa hadn't noticed before. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click sounded, and the lid released, opening to reveal a velvet-lined interior. Nestled within was a small device about the size of a smartphone, its casing made of the same burnished metal as the box, engraved with the now familiar ivy pattern. "The quantum butterfly," Emma said reverently. Robert carefully lifted the device. There was a small display screen, currently dark, and what appeared to be a fingerprint sensor. "All 3, Emma instructed, "together." Understanding, Robert placed his thumb on the sensor. Melissa added hers, overlapping slightly, and then guided Emma's smaller thumb to join them. The display flickered to life, showing the image of a butterfly with wings that seemed to shift and change as they watched mathematical formulas flowing across them like liquid. "It's beautiful," Melissa whispered, "and worth billions to the right buyer," came a cold voice from the entrance of the blind. They turned to find Lawrence Crane standing in the doorway, a pistol aimed steadily at Robert's chest. His expensive suit was torn and muddied, his usual immaculate appearance compromised by the night spent hunting them through the woods. Behind him, Daniel Harlow's brutal face appeared, his eyes fixing on Melissa with unsettling intensity. A gash above his eye from Melissa's lantern strike had been hastily bandaged. "Hello, Melissa," Daniel said, his voice carrying a familiarity that made her skin crawl. "Rachel always said you were smart. Seems she was right." Robert shifted subtly, positioning himself between the gunman and Melissa and Emma. The quantum device remained in his hand, its display still showing the mesmerizing butterfly pattern. "It's over, Larry," he said calmly. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work." Crane's thin lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "On the contrary, Robert, everything is proceeding exactly as planned." He gestured with the gun. "The device, please." "You killed Catherine," Robert said, making no move to comply. "And Rachel, for what money?" "For vision," Crane corrected. "Catherine and Rachel were idealists. They couldn't see the true potential of what they'd created." "An unbreakable encryption protocol," Robert said, "one that would render current cybersecurity obsolete. Worth billions to governments, corporations, anyone with secrets to keep." Crane stepped further into the blind, his expensive suit incongruous in the rustic setting. "But they wanted to give it away, make it open source. Can you imagine the waste?" "That was the point," Melissa interjected, her voice stronger than she felt. "Mom and Catherine believed encryption should belong to everyone or no one." Crane's cold gaze shifted to her. Naive idealism, the same weakness that got them both killed. Robert's hands tightened around the device. "You drugged Catherine, sabotaged her boat. A regrettable necessity. She was becoming suspicious of certain financial transactions." Crane's expression hardened. "She'd discovered my arrangements with our Chinese partners, arrangements worth billions to me personally." "And Rachel," Melissa's voice trembled with barely controlled rage. "What was her crime?" "Persistence," Crane shrugged. "After Catherine's unfortunate accident, she became a liability. She knew too much, suspected too much. The cancer was convenient. It just needed a little acceleration." "You monster," Melissa whispered. "You can call me whatever you like, Miss Bennett. It doesn't change the fact that you're about to hand over that device." Crane nodded to Daniel, who stepped forward, gun trained on Emma. "Children are remarkably resilient," Crane continued, "but even they have limits. Please don't make this any more unpleasant than it needs to be." Robert felt a cold fury building inside him. This man had murdered his wife, had killed Rachel, and was now threatening his granddaughter. But Crane had one critical weakness, his arrogance. He believed himself smarter than everyone else in the room, including Emma. "She told me you would say that," Robert said, his voice steady. Crane's eyes narrowed. "Who? Oh, Catherine. In Emma's dreams, she told Emma exactly what would happen here today." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Crane's face. He glanced at Emma, who stared back at him with those unnervingly perceptive blue eyes. "You're going to lose everything," Emma said with the simple directness of a child stating an obvious fact. "The butterflies aren't for you." "Enough of this nonsense." Crane's composure slipped slightly. "The device now, or Harlow, starts with the child." Robert glanced down at the quantum device, then at Emma, who was watching him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. She gave him a slight nod. "You want it?" Robert asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Here." He tossed the device directly at Crane's face. The executive's reflexes took over. He flinched and raised his free hand to catch it, momentarily pointing the gun away from Robert. It was all the opening Robert needed. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Crane's midsection with the force of decades of pent-up rage. They crashed to the ground, the gun discharging with a deafening report in the confined space. Daniel Harlow moved to intervene, but Melissa was ready. Grabbing a heavy lantern from the blind shelf, she swung it with all her might at Daniel's head. The impact sent him staggering, but he maintained his grip on the gun, swinging it toward Melissa. "Mom!" Emma cried, darting forward. Melissa pulled Emma behind her, backing toward the wall, as Daniel recovered blood now flowing freely from the reopened wound above his eye. "You're just like your mother," he snarled. "Too stupid to know when to give up." Outside the blind, the sound of approaching vehicles broke through the forest. Quiet, heavy engines, the crunch of tires on gravel. Robert and Crane grappled on the floor, each fighting for control of the gun. Despite his age and the night's exertions, Robert matched the younger executive's strength with sheer determination. This man had murdered Catherine, had poisoned Rachel, had threatened his newfound family. The rage gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. He managed to slam Crane's gun hand against the floor once, twice. The weapon discharged again, the bullet splintering the wooden wall. On the third impact, Crane's grip loosened, and the gun skittered away across the floor. Daniel lunged for the weapon, momentarily distracted from Melissa and Emma. In that instant, Emma darted past her mother, retrieving the quantum device from where it had fallen. She held it protectively against her chest, those remarkable blue eyes blazing with defiance. "You can't have it," she declared. "It's not for people like you." Daniel raised his gun, aiming it at the child. "Give it to me, you little—" The door to the blind burst open, light flooding the dim interior. Daniel whirled, gun still raised, and found himself facing a wall of tactical vests and raised weapons. "Federal agents' hands where we can see them." James Morgan stood at the center, his weathered face grim with determination. Flanking him were half a dozen agents in FBI tactical gear. And behind them, looking battered but triumphant, stood Frank Miller, his Marine training evident in his stance. "Drop the weapon," Morgan barked as Daniel hesitated, gun still in hand. For a terrible moment, it seemed Daniel would fire anyway, a last desperate act. Then his shoulders sagged, and the gun clattered to the floor. He slowly raised his hands. On the ground, Crane stopped, struggling against Robert's grip, his calculating mind already plotting his next move. Robert delivered one final satisfying punch to Crane's jaw before rolling off him and standing, breathing heavily. "Took you long enough," he said to Morgan, relief evident beneath the gruffness. "Your friend Frank here led us right to you," Morgan replied, nodding toward the former Marine. "Found him downstream, commandeered a fisherman's boat, and insisted on joining the extraction team." Frank shrugged, a hint of a smile beneath his battered exterior. "Couldn't let the bad guys win, could I?" As the agents secured Crane and Harlow, Robert turned to Emma, who still clutched the quantum device protectively. "It's all right now, Emma," he said gently. "You can put that down." The little girl shook her head, a sudden seriousness in her expression. "It's not finished yet," she said. "The butterflies need to fly." She pressed her small thumb to the device's sensor. The screen glowed brighter, the butterfly animation becoming more complex, more vibrant. "Emma, what are you doing?" Melissa asked, moving to her daughter's side. "What Grandma Catherine and Grandma Rachel wanted me to do," Emma replied. "Letting the butterflies go free." The device emitted a soft musical tone, the music box at last revealing its true nature. The butterfly on the screen seemed to pulse with new energy, its wings now displaying a complex sequence of code. "It's transmitting," Morgan said, checking a handheld device that had begun to beep insistently. "Some kind of signal. I've never seen anything like it." "Everywhere," Emma said simply. "To everyone." The small conference room at the FBI field office buzzed with activity. Agents moved efficiently between computer stations monitoring the unprecedented situation unfolding across global information networks. Robert sat with Melissa and Emma watching as the senior cybersecurity analyst explained what was happening. "It's unlike anything we've ever seen," the analyst said, her eyes wide with professional excitement. "The quantum encryption protocol is simultaneously securing and releasing itself across every major server network in the world." "In English, please," Frank requested from his position near the door. The old Marine had refused medical attention for his injuries until he was certain Melissa and Emma were safe. "It's basically vaccinating the internet," the analyst clarified, "installing itself as an open-source security protocol that anyone can use but no one can monopolize. The algorithm is self-propagating, self-defending, and apparently impossible to remove or contain." "The butterfly," Emma said, nodding as if this were exactly what she expected. Robert studied the screens showing the protocol spread across global networks. Financial systems, government databases, social media platforms, all were being touched by the quantum butterfly. Catherine and Rachel planned this from the beginning, he realized. The device was never meant to be kept secret. It was designed to release the protocol to everyone simultaneously. "But why wait?" Melissa asked. "Why hide it for years?" "The technology wasn't ready yet," Robert surmised. Quantum computing needed to reach a certain threshold before the butterfly could successfully propagate. Morgan approached, his expression grave. "Robert, the director, wants to see you, alone." Robert squeezed Melissa's hand reassuringly before following Morgan to another conference room. Inside, a tall, distinguished man in a crisp suit waited, flanked by several serious-looking officials. "Director Carson," Morgan introduced them. "This is Robert Harrington." Carson nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Harrington, quite the situation you have helped create." "I had nothing to do with creating the quantum butterfly," Robert replied evenly. "That was my late wife and her colleagues' work." "Perhaps, but you facilitated its release, and that release has created complications." Carson gestured to the screens displaying global cybersecurity alerts. "Every intelligence agency on the planet is currently having what can only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. The protocol makes their systems more secure," Robert pointed out. "It also makes everyone else's systems equally secure," Carson countered. "Do you understand what that means? Intelligence gathering as we know it could collapse. Government surveillance, corporate data mining, all of it fundamentally altered." "Some might call that progress," Robert said quietly. Carson's expression softened slightly. "I might even agree with you personally, but professionally I'm dealing with pressure from the White House, the Pentagon, and every three-letter agency you can imagine. What does that mean for me, for my daughter and granddaughter?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Carson began to pace. "Lawrence Crane will face charges for the murders of Catherine Harrington and Rachel Bennett. We have his confession on record thanks to Morgan's foresight in wiring you. Daniel Harlow is equally implicated. But there are powerful people who want someone to blame for the quantum butterfly release. Someone visible, someone public." Carson stopped pacing and faced Robert directly. "Your name is on the short list." Robert understood immediately. "You want a scapegoat." "I want to protect that little girl and her mother," Carson corrected. "Because if it's not you taking the fall, the attention will inevitably turn to them." The implications were clear. Robert could sacrifice himself to protect Melissa and Emma. His wealth, his company, his freedom, all would be lost, but they would remain safe. "What exactly are you proposing, Director?" "A formal separation from Harrington Technologies, full cooperation with ongoing investigations. Your expertise in helping us understand and adapt to this new encryption landscape." Carson leaned forward. "In exchange, we ensure that your family remains free from prosecution or harassment." Robert considered the offer. Just days ago, the thought of losing Harrington Technologies would have been unthinkable. But now faced with the reality of a daughter and granddaughter he never knew he had, the choice was surprisingly simple. I'll need certain guarantees, Robert said finally. Financial provisions for Melissa and Emma. Their connection to the quantum butterfly kept completely confidential. Agreed. Carson nodded. We'll begin arrangements immediately. When Robert returned to the main conference room, Melissa could read the decision in his face. What happened? She asked quietly, as Emma played with a puzzle an agent had found for her. I've made a deal, Robert explained. I'll take public responsibility for the quantum butterfly's release. In exchange, you and Emma will be protected. Melissa's eyes widened. You're giving up everything. Robert shook his head. Well, everything, not what matters. For the first time since they'd met, Melissa didn't pull away when Robert reached for her hand. 2 weeks later, the 3 silver rings lay side by side on the polished wooden table of a secluded cabin in the Vermont mountains. Robert had purchased the property through a series of discreet transactions, using funds he'd managed to secure before his assets were frozen. Outside, snow was falling gently the first of the season, creating a peaceful blanket across the landscape. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting warm light over the 3 people seated around the table. I still don't understand how the rings work, Melissa admitted, studying the silver bands with their ivy pattern. How could they be encryption keys? They're just metal. Robert picked up his ring, turning it to catch the firelight. Not just metal. Catherine had these custom-made with a specific nickel-silver alloy that contains trace elements of quantum-sensitive materials. Quantum dots, Emma said, nodding, hidden in the ivy pattern. Melissa smiled at her daughter's understanding. In the weeks since their ordeal, Emma's knowledge of quantum physics and advanced mathematics had become impossible to dismiss as coincidence or imagination. Tests had confirmed what they already knew: the child possessed extraordinary gifts. Exactly, Robert agreed. The pattern itself is a physical representation of the encryption algorithm. When all 3 rings are aligned correctly, they form a complete key that can be read by the quantum device. But how did Emma know about all this? Melissa asked the question that had been haunting her. How did she dream about Catherine, about the music box, about everything? Robert hesitated, his expression thoughtful. I have a theory, though it's unconventional. More unconventional than quantum encryption rings? Melissa asked wryly. Perhaps. Robert leaned forward. Catherine was deeply interested in quantum entanglement, the idea that paired quantum particles remain connected regardless of distance. She once theorized that consciousness itself might operate on quantum principles. You're suggesting some kind of psychic connection. Melissa's skepticism was evident. Not psychic, quantum. Robert looked at Emma, who was listening intently. The quantum dots in these rings aren't ordinary materials. They were specially formulated by Dr. Chen to maintain quantum coherence at room temperature, something previously thought impossible. Catherine and Rachel wore these rings for years, interacting with the quantum material daily. And Emma inherited some kind of quantum sensitivity. Melissa finished, trying to process the implications. More than that, Robert continued, Emma's developing brain is uniquely suited to process quantum information. Catherine's research suggested that children, particularly those with certain neurological differences, like Emma's mild autism, might have enhanced abilities to perceive quantum effects that adult brains have learned to filter out. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. That's how Grandma Catherine talks to me, through the quantum butterflies. Melissa struggled to reconcile the scientific explanation with the seemingly magical abilities her daughter displayed. So you're saying the rings created some kind of quantum channel that Emma can access? I'm saying Catherine and Rachel may have discovered something even more revolutionary than an encryption protocol, Robert said gently. They may have found evidence that consciousness itself has quantum properties that can transcend ordinary boundaries of space and time. Melissa exchanged glances with Robert, both adults still struggling to fully comprehend Emma's connection to a woman she had never physically met. Whatever the explanation, Robert said gently, Emma's abilities helped us reveal the truth and fulfill Catherine and Rachel's vision. The quantum butterfly protocol is now protecting privacy and information security for billions of people worldwide. At the cost of your company and fortune, Melissa pointed out. Robert shrugged. Harrington Technologies will survive under new leadership, and I managed to secure enough resources to ensure we'll live comfortably. He glanced around the well-appointed cabin. Not quite a Manhattan penthouse, but there are compensations. The main compensation sat across from him, his daughter and granddaughter family. He never knew he had until Catherine and Rachel's final gift had brought them together. There's something else I've been wondering, Melissa said, her fingers brushing the rings. If these were so important, why did Mom give me one of them when I was 16? Wasn't that risky? She must have trusted you implicitly, Robert said, and perhaps she wanted to ensure the rings were separated as a precaution. Or she knew what would happen, Emma suggested. She knew you would need it someday to find each other. The simplicity of the child's observations silenced both adults. After a moment, Robert cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. I've been meaning to show you something, he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a folded document and handed it to Melissa. She opened it, her eyes widening as she read. This is a DNA test, confirming what we already suspected. I am your biological father. Robert's expression was solemn. I know it doesn't change the past, the years I wasn't there for you, but I hoped it might help us build a future. Melissa stared at the document, emotions warring on her face. All those years struggling, working multiple jobs, watching Mom sacrifice everything for me. You were off building an empire. I didn't know, Robert said softly. If I had, would it really have made a difference? Melissa asked, her voice tight with years of accumulated pain. A brilliant CEO with his brilliant wife. Would you really have welcomed Rachel's child into your perfect life? The question hung heavily between them, honest and brutal. Robert considered it, carefully refusing to offer platitudes. The man I was then, I don't know, he admitted finally. I was ambitious-driven. Catherine and I were building something revolutionary. A child wasn't part of the plan. He met Melissa's gaze directly. But I'd like to think that knowing about you would have changed me sooner rather than later. Melissa absorbed his words, appreciating the honesty, if not entirely comforted by it. And now, she asked, what happens now? That depends on you, Robert said. I've lost my company, my reputation, most of my fortune. But I've gained perspective, and maybe if you're willing a chance to know my daughter and granddaughter. Emma, who had been listening silently, reached out and took one of Robert's hands and one of Melissa's, joining them together on the table. The rings were broken apart, she said wisely, but they came back together when they needed to, like us. The months that followed were not easy. The legal fallout from the Quantum Butterfly's release kept Robert occupied with government hearings and interviews. The media painted him as either a cybersecurity terrorist or a digital freedom fighter, depending on their political leanings. Harrington Technologies' stock initially plummeted, though it gradually stabilized under new leadership. Through it all, Melissa and Emma remained sheltered at the Vermont cabin, their connection to the events kept confidential as promised. But proximity did not automatically translate to family bonds. He's trying, Mom, Emma observed one evening as they watched Robert chopping wood outside a task he'd never done before in his life of luxury. I know, Melissa sighed. It's just complicated. Because you're still angry. Melissa smiled ruefully at her daughter's perception. Yes, partly, but also because we're strangers trying to be family. It doesn't happen overnight. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly 3 months after moving to Vermont. Robert received a call from Morgan Crane had escaped federal custody during a transfer, reportedly with help from his Chinese connections. The threat level was assessed as minimal given Crane's exposure and the international manhunt, but Robert wasn't taking chances. We should move, he told Melissa, somewhere less isolated with better security. To his surprise, she refused. This is our home now. Emma's settled in school, making friends for the first time. I won't uproot her again. But if Crane, then we'll face him, Melissa interrupted, a steely determination in her eyes that reminded Robert painfully of Rachel. Together, we're not running anymore. That night, after Emma was asleep, Melissa found Robert still awake, staring at the fireplace. I've been unfair to you, she said, settling into the chair opposite him. Robert looked up surprised. You have every right to your feelings, Melissa. Yes, but, she hesitated, I've been blaming you for not being there when you didn't even know about me. That's not right. If I had known, we can't change the past, Melissa interrupted gently. Mom made her choice. She believed it was the right one at the time. Rachel was always protecting people. Robert said softly. It was her nature. Tell me about her, Melissa said suddenly, from before, when you were young. For hours they talked. Robert shared stories of Rachel at Harvard, her brilliant artistic mind, her stubborn idealism, her infectious laugh. Melissa countered with tales from her childhood. Rachel's determination to give her daughter everything she needed, her creativity in making something from nothing, her unwavering belief in Melissa's potential. Gradually, night after night, they pieced together a fuller picture of Rachel Bennett, not just as a mother or a lost love, but as a complete person, with strengths, flaws, and an extraordinary vision that had ultimately changed the world. And in understanding Rachel more fully, they began to understand each other. The reopening of Riverside Diner drew a modest crowd of locals. Frank Miller, now fully recovered from his injuries, had used Robert's investment to renovate the historic building while preserving its essential character. Robert, Melissa, and Emma sat in the corner booth, the same one where he had first met them. Emma was excitedly explaining her science fair project, a simplified demonstration of quantum entanglement that had baffled her teachers to an attentive Frank. You seem happy, Morgan observed, sliding into the seat across from Robert. The former FBI agent had established his own security firm and remained a loyal ally. I am, Robert admitted, watching Melissa laugh at something Frank had said. Not something I expected to feel again after Catherine died. Speaking of unexpected, Morgan lowered his voice. Crane's been spotted in Beijing, working for a Chinese tech firm, apparently. Robert nodded, unsurprised. And the quantum butterfly? Still spreading, the tech community has embraced it completely. Most major platforms have integrated it into their security architecture. Morgan smiled slightly. The intelligence agencies have adapted as they always do. New methods, new approaches. And my legal status? The Justice Department is satisfied with your cooperation. The asset forfeitures and fines will be finalized next month, but you'll keep enough to live comfortably. More than enough, Robert agreed, glancing at Melissa and Emma. What matters is they're safe. Morgan studied him for a moment. You know, I worked with you for 15 years, and I never saw you truly happy. Not even close to this. Robert considered this. I spent decades chasing the wrong things, building empires instead of relationships. Better late than never, Morgan said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. The Catherine and Rachel Foundation headquarters occupied a modest building overlooking the Connecticut River in Westport, just a mile from the diner. Its mission, supporting women in STEM fields and advocating for open-source security technologies, had quickly gained international recognition despite its founder's controversial status. Robert sat in his office reviewing grant applications. His hair had more silver now, and he'd grown a neatly trimmed beard that suited his new role as foundation director rather than corporate titan. The Wall Street Journal lay open on his desk, featuring an article about Harrington Technologies' recovery under new leadership. He no longer wore his ivy ring. All 3 rings now resided in a special display in the Foundation's lobby, symbolic of the partnership that had created the quantum butterfly protocol. A knock at the door interrupted his work. Melissa entered, dressed in the business casual attire she'd adopted since becoming the Foundation's education director. The tour group from MIT is here, she informed him. Emma's already charming them with quantum physics explanations that have the professors taking notes. Robert smiled proudly. She's quite the ambassador for our scholarship program. Their relationship had evolved gradually over the past year, moving from tentative cooperation to genuine affection. Melissa still called him Robert rather than Dad, but the way she said it had softened, carrying undertones of familial warmth rather than formal distance. Frank called. She continued, taking a seat across from him. The diner's summer festival fundraiser exceeded expectations. They'll be able to complete the community center renovation ahead of schedule. Excellent news. Riverside Diner had become a hub for the Foundation's community outreach programs, with Frank serving as local coordinator. The former Marine had found a new purpose, supporting educational initiatives for disadvantaged youth. Also, James Morgan sent over the latest security assessment. Melissa handed him a sealed envelope. He says we're clear of surveillance for the first time since the butterfly release. Robert opened the envelope, scanning the former FBI agent's meticulous report. Morgan had established his own security firm and remained a loyal ally, helping navigate the complex aftermath of the quantum butterfly's release. The international arrest warrants for Crane have been issued, Robert noted with satisfaction. Interpol finally has enough evidence linking him to Chinese intelligence operations. Crane had escaped federal custody 6 months earlier during a prisoner transfer, a sophisticated operation that suggested high-level assistance. He had reportedly fled to China, but his former connections there had apparently abandoned him once his usefulness ended. Recent intelligence suggested he was trying to sell what little he knew about the quantum butterfly to smaller players with diminishing returns. Daniel Harlow wasn't so lucky, Melissa observed. 20 years without parole for his role in Mom's death. Justice had come slowly but decisively for those responsible. The evidence Morgan had accumulated, combined with Crane's recorded confession, had been damning. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Robert asked, changing the subject to something brighter. Melissa smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her features. "Emma's been packed for days. She's convinced the butterflies at the Costa Rican research station are somehow related to her quantum ones." The planned trip, their first real family vacation, represented more than just a break from work. It symbolized their transition from reluctant allies thrown together by crisis to a family choosing to build memories together. "She might be right," Robert said thoughtfully. Catherine always believed patterns in nature reflected deeper mathematical truths. "Speaking of patterns," Melissa hesitated, then continued, "Emma's been drawing something new, something about the next generation of the protocol." Robert raised an eyebrow. "The quantum butterfly 2.0. Something like that. She says Catherine is still helping her understand it." Melissa shrugged, having come to accept her daughter's inexplicable connection to her grandmother. "Whatever it is she says, it will help protect people's thoughts, not just their data." "Neural encryption," Robert murmured, intrigued. Catherine was theorizing about it years ago, but the technology didn't exist yet. "Well, according to Emma, it will soon." Melissa stood, checking her watch. "We should join the tour group. The MIT quantum computing professor specifically asked to meet you." Robert rose, smoothing his tie, a far cry from the bespoke suits of his CEO days, but comfortable in its simplicity, like his new life. "Melissa," he said suddenly as she reached for the door, "I never properly thanked you." She turned, puzzled. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. For letting me be part of your lives." Melissa's expression softened. "Mom always said people deserve the opportunity to become their better selves." She smiled slightly. "I think she'd be proud of all of us." As they walked through the foundation offices, staff members greeted them warmly. Many were former Harrington Technologies employees who had chosen to follow Robert into his new venture, believing in his transformed mission. They passed the display case housing the 3 silver rings, their ivy patterns catching the light. Beside them stood a photograph of Catherine and Rachel Young, and smiling arms around each other at Harvard, their future brilliance already evident in their eyes. Robert paused briefly, acknowledging silently all that had been lost and all that had been gained. Catherine and Rachel had created something revolutionary, not just in their quantum encryption protocol, but in the legacy they'd left behind, a legacy now carried forward by their descendants. Outside the conference room, Emma was holding court with the visiting academics, her blonde curls bouncing as she enthusiastically explained concepts that children her age shouldn't comprehend. When she spotted Robert and Melissa, her face lit up with a smile that made the painful journey worthwhile. "Grandpa, Mom, I was just telling Professor Chen about the butterfly effect in quantum encryption." Robert froze momentarily at the name. Professor Chen, a middle-aged woman, stepped forward, extending her hand. "Lisa Chen, Quantum Computing Department." Her eyes twinkled with intelligence. "Emma tells me you knew my father, Wei Chen." Robert exchanged glances with Melissa, both recognizing the significance of this connection. "Yes," Robert said, shaking her hand firmly. "Your father was a brilliant man who helped create something extraordinary." "So I'm learning," Dr. Chen replied. "Emma has some remarkable insights into his work." As the group moved into the conference room, Robert felt Melissa's hand slip into his, a simple gesture that would have seemed impossible a year ago. He squeezed it gently, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new butterflies might emerge from Emma's extraordinary mind, they would face them together, a family forged not just by blood and DNA, but by a shared commitment to the vision that Catherine and Rachel had entrusted to them. Outside, autumn leaves swirled in patterns that might, to the right observer, resemble the wings of countless butterflies, carrying their transformative influence, across a world forever changed by the power of three silver rings and the love, sacrifice, and vision they represented.